Hello everyone, this is Ankur Joshi. I'm the founder and CEO of Nuclei. We are a fintech company where we work with banks like Federal Bank and deploy our fintech products across the industry. Today, I am privileged to have Shalini Warrier, who is the ED of Federal Bank, on our podcast. Shalini Ma'am has been a constant support and a mentor for us, and it is a great honor for me to finally get to speak to her and invite her on our podcast. Ma'am, thank you so much for giving us your time and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ankur. It's my pleasure to be here. I know we've interacted extensively in the course of the stuff we work with Nuclei on, but this is kind of a very, very different forum. Looking forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Awesome. Same here, ma'am. So, ma'am, we were discussing just before we started recording that we wanted to understand more about your journey, more about where you came from, how you went about your journey, your mental models, your frameworks which you used over the course of, a lot of decision making which went into, you working across so many countries, so many verticals, right? But before all that happened, we wanted to go back to your formative years, where you came from, your family background. What led to you following this path? So if you can, delve deeper into that, that would be wonderful.
Thanks, Ankur. And, actually, I come from a normal middle class family, like I think a lot of us in India do. And to a very large extent, whatever has been my kind of journey has been shaped by the family background, a set of strong parents and a sister who's, a doctor and quite devoted to that profession. So that's really shaped up. I think 3 or 4 attributes that I would say have been kind of embedded in me from a very, very young age. One is, I think there is no substitute for hard work. I think that has been something that has been always kind of ingrained in me. A very large amount of focus and attention on discipline, and how do you make sure that you follow a kind of a disciplined routine in whatever we do. And I think the third one I would say is really opportunities and not letting go of opportunities when they come and seeking out opportunities for changes to be made. So why do I say this? So I just go back, I kind of did a large part of my schooling in Chennai and a large part of my kind of college education and my chartered accountancy in Bangalore. So those were the 2 main places that I kind of spent a large part of my formative years on. I distinctly remember initially saying that I would like to be a teacher, but somewhere along the way, I think I gave up that. No disrespect for the profession, and even today I enjoy taking classes for people on the go, etc. But I just realized it was probably not my cup of tea from a point of view of a career standpoint. And typically in those days, Ankur, you're too young to probably reflect on those days. But in those days, it was either an engineer or a doctor. That were typically what most people would follow. My sister was, going the medical stream, so I didn't want to do that. And I somehow thought I wouldn't be a failure as an engineer. No disrespect again to that profession, but I just didn't think I had it in me. But I realized that, I had a flair for numbers. I liked, kind of analytics around the numbers, etc. And that's when I chose to become a chartered accountant, and I kind of, embedded myself into that profession. While I was doing my CA itself, maybe I was kind of, quite self-confident and assured. I was very clear that I would not become a chartered accountant in practice. I always knew that financial services was where I wanted to be. And that's how, as soon as I qualified as a chartered accountant, I decided to join a bank, and I joined Standard Chartered Bank. So I did 25 years with Standard Chartered Bank. But when I started in Standard Chartered Bank, it was as a management trainee. And as a management trainee, you go through the grind. There have been days when I've reconciled vouchers, when I've done tick back of vouchers, when I've done audit of various things, various roles in the initial few years, because I honestly believe that anybody who's coming into a career should not come in with a preconceived notion that this is the only thing they will do, particularly in the first 5 to 7 years. So I believe in that, and I practiced that in my first 5 to 7 years. So it was only after about 5 or 7 years that I realized my cup of tea was really around anything to do with a confluence or a congregation between operations, technology, business, anything that brought all these things together, because it seemed to resonate with me that it would have more operational stuff, technical stuff, but also a lot of people related stuff. So somewhere along the way, I took the route of, while my core competence was still finance and, that kind of stuff, being a chartered accountant, I didn't actually do a core finance role. I moved into ops, I moved into technology, I moved into service delivery with a lot of customer service related aspects where you get the brickbats and the bouquets from customers. But, I took my thrills from there. And I think, to be fair, Standard Chartered had a lot of opportunities that they threw at me, and I was willing and able to pick up those opportunities. So I did the first 15 years really with Standard Chartered in India. And then the first opportunity came to go abroad. Standard Chartered is a multinational British bank presence across many countries. So an opportunity came to go abroad. And the opportunity was really to become the Chief Executive Officer of the Standard Chartered business in Brunei. I must admit, when somebody did tell me, when my boss kind of spoke to me about that, I had no idea where Brunei was. I literally had to look up Atlas and try and figure out, okay, where exactly are the people sending, is the bank sending me to? But then it was a huge opportunity. I realized that the one out of the normal routine kind of an assignment, because typically what happens in Standard Chartered is most people, when they leave India, they go abroad. Their first posting tends to be normally Singapore, followed by maybe a Dubai. That's kind of the choices that come up, because the bank has a big presence in Singapore and Dubai. But this was a little offbeat and out of the ordinary, and I kind of just learned up a lot about Brunei, and I landed up over there. And I must admit, they were a very defining, I did only about 18 months over there, but they were a very defining 18 months, because I was the first woman kind of chief executive. I was the first South Asian, because normally the bank had posted Europeans and Britishers, etc. And it was a small country, so you can visualize me being transported from a Malabar hill in Mumbai, where I was at that time, to a country which has a total population of 300,000 or 320,000. That was the kind of contrast. But the bank did a lot in terms of kind of giving me training from a culture perspective, from a political, what is the country like. The bank did a lot, and I also invested a lot in learning more about the country and embedding myself in the social fabric of the country. And I enjoyed the 18 months as the CEO over there. The bank has a fairly good business out there, which we grew, etc. The opportunity then came to do something different, which was again to go to a different kind of a country, which was Indonesia. So
just before, I know you served across a lot of countries, but before that, I wanted to go a bit back and discuss about your initial few years, the 5 to 7 years where you worked across multiple verticals, right? Generally, if I look at a lot of bankers, young bankers who have just joined the banks, they come, as you rightly mentioned, that they come with a preconceived notion that credit is something where I want to go deep into, or deposits is something where I want to go deep into, or investment banking is something where I want to go deep into, or treasury, right? Was that a deliberate choice at your end to do multiple verticals in order to diversify your skill set, in order to keep a lot of options open for yourself rather than becoming siloed into a particular vertical?
Yes. So Ankur, you're right. A lot of people join banking with this notion that, treasury is where I want to be in. As you said, these are the specialist areas. But when I came in, and in the first 5 or 6 years, I kind of made it very clear to everybody who I was working with and my bosses that I want to experiment. I want to try different things. So I started with actually something as inane as internal audit, and I kind of learned my ropes out there. But then I got an opportunity to move into the credit card business, which Standard Chartered was forming at that point of time. It was a new business, and the bank was entering into the business. So I got this opportunity to move into the credit card business, which I thought was a huge opportunity, because building something new is always very unique and special. So I moved into the credit card business, and within that business, I did various roles. Once I got into that business, I realized that my flair and my kind of, what I really enjoyed doing was dealing with multiple customers, dealing with multiple people, dealing with the volume of stuff that one has to handle, rather than being more narrowly focused on high value, small number. So clearly in my mind, retail and anything to do with retail resonated much more. So then I said, it was after about 4-5 years that I decided, and I made a conscious choice to say I would focus on anything to do with retail, not focus on wholesale. But within retail, I've done various roles. So within retail, I've done business roles, I've done operations, I've done technology, I've done customer service, I've done some finance, I've done various roles within retail. So that's how in the first 5 years. So it was literally started with being an experimentation, which what I encourage people to do. So a lot of probationary officers join Federal Bank, about 1,000 of them every year. When I chat with them, I say, take the first 4-5 years in your stride. Try various things. The bank will throw you opportunities. It may be in a rural branch, it may be in risk management, it may be in operations, it may be in technology. Go ahead, do it with your full gusto, do it with devotion. You will learn something. Don't form a notion that says I do want to be in corporate. After 4-5 years, I think it's fair, you'll start getting a much better idea. So my journey was exactly that, and it was after 4-5 years that I decided retail is where I really enjoy and what I'd like doing. Not to say I don't. In my current role, I do oversee some parts of wholesale. In my ops role, I've done it, but somehow I get my kick out of retail.
Yeah. So I think the fact that you had such a wide view of the banking ecosystem, right, across operations, across technology, across retail, across wholesale, treasury, that had a big role to play into you being made the CEO of SC, Standard Stancy Brunei, right? Because a lot of times we also internally speak about being having a diversified skill sets rather than being a single vertical specialist, right? So being a generalist rather than a specialist.
Yeah, it's always important, in particularly in banking industry. I'm sure it's true for many other industries, but I know banking is a thing. To be aware of what's happening everywhere. You may choose to say that this is what I enjoy doing. Like I chose to say that retail is what I enjoy doing, but that doesn't mean I do not know enough about wholesale. I do not have an appreciation of wholesale. I can understand it, and you're right. That's what makes you kind of move up into a role of a CEO, or the kind of role I'm doing right now as an executive director, etc. So yes, you're right about it. That makes it rounded. But it's also the individual concern, right, Ankur? You have to look for those opportunities. The bank can only do this much. It's up to you. If the bank is coming, 5% of the way, it's really up to you to do the 95%,
Absolutely, absolutely. And was the choice to work across multiple countries with Stancy also with the same direction to diversify experience? Because when you go into different countries, as you rightly said, that when you immerse yourself in the social fabric of that country, you acquire a lot of cultural nuances, you acquire a lot of cultural wealth.
Yeah. So again, two sides of it. Yes, it was a conscious decision on my part, because I'd reached a stage where I think opportunities in India were getting to be a little stale, etc., and would have been more of the same. So there was some part of me seeking out new challenges and new opportunities, and the bank was also kind of open to give me those opportunities. So for the bank, it was as much as a risk for the bank to take me and put me in Brunei as it was for me to go to Brunei. So I think it was a meeting of both there. And I think that's the point that I keep harping to in a lot of my kind of discussions with people, saying it takes two to tango, it takes two to clap. So yes, the bank will throw opportunities, but it's up to you to pick it up. If at that point I had chosen not to do that for whatever reason, I'm sure the bank would have given me something else, but it may have gone a very, very different route. Today, I can very justifiably be proud of kind of the learnings I've had from working in a Brunei, working in Indonesia, working in a Dubai, which are to some extent offbeat. And the first couple of years being Brunei, Indonesia was very helpful, Ankur, because again, what happens is if you go to a Singapore first, you tend to then, I must admit, stay there itself, So I would have stayed in Singapore and probably very, very different route. But the fact that I went to a Brunei first and then in Indonesia and then only got to Singapore gave me a very, very different perspective. I acquired a lot of friends in both places, but more importantly, I acquired the ethos and philosophy of some of these countries, that I can relate to even now.
Okay, okay. Also, because I believe Singapore and Dubai were the safer choice, right? They were more in the comfort zone. Brunei, Indonesia were outside the comfort zone. So that also accelerates your learning, right? As you rightly said, that you learned a lot across these. Now, one of the perceptions which gets formed around a lot of successful leaders, and you have been a extremely successful, you have had an extremely successful career and extremely successful leader, someone which I obviously look up to, right? But the perception goes that whatever you touch turns to gold, right? That's what the perception is. But I'm 100% sure that you have had a lot of ups and downs along the way, right? So, and those are the pivotal points. Those are the points where you learn a lot, right? I want to delve deeper into some of the failures that you have had, which have taught you big lessons. And what is one of your favorite failures, right? Because personally speaking, I love to fail because it teaches you a lot of things, right? Because on those learnings, you are able to then, make sure that you don't repeat those mistakes in the future.
Yeah, so I think, I presume it's quite a cliche, right? Failure is a stepping stone to success. That's what people say, etc. But it's, I think, quite true. And I think now, racking my brains to think of a couple of examples, but I'll probably start with something more recent as, 4 years back, actually, and then, tell you about a couple of other instances also. And, I have a couple of them on the professional side, a couple of them on the personal side. So I'll probably cover both of them. Yeah. First, on the professional side, Ankur, and I'll talk about August 2018. In my current role, when I moved into federal, and I was in federal, I had been in federal for about 3 years. August 2018, for the audience and you who might remember, Kerala went through one of its worst floods. It was really very bad, once in 100 years kind of an event, etc. And Aluva, the head office, which you've visited, was literally at the epicenter of that, floods. We really got impacted. So I live over here. So there was, on the personal side, there was a lot of stuff with, the house getting flooded, people, me and, my family having to be rescued, etc., etc. So that was happening at one end. But the bank was also quite seriously impacted because of the data center and, the data center having to be brought down. And while we had disaster recovery capability and we had switched a lot to disaster recovery capability, the fact remains that when you have a crisis of this nature, it's not likely you'll be able to do everything according to the rule book, So we did have a situation where, we had a lot of customer issues. We had a lot of, feedback from customers that transactions were not getting processed, etc. And you should see this in the context of the fact that, it was preceding Ramzan and Onam, which were big events for anybody in the calendar, particularly for people in Kerala. It was very, very focused on Kerala, so the rest of the country and abroad were not able to kind of recognize what the people were going through. Most of my people were impacted with all the floods, etc. And in the midst of that, there was these customer service issues, and we had a lot of partners not happy with us, etc. I think that was literally very much of an eye-opener for us in the bank and for me personally on what is really this whole capability of disaster recovery, business continuity. It brought it into a very practical level because until then it had all been to some extent theoretical. And that learning, I think, is once in a lifetime. And I don't want to wish it on anybody. I don't wish it on ourselves, nor do I wish it on anybody. But I think it was we literally had to grapple with a lot of issues from a personal front, from a professional front. And since then, we've made a lot of progress, I think. So I think that was one learning that I think I will treasure. In the fact that from a professional standpoint, resilience, stability counts for a very, very lot because we live in very uncertain times. So that I think was one. The second was more personal, and this was after my Brunei stint. I did move to Jakarta, and I went into a role which was a very reasonably complex role. So I was seconded from Standard Chartered Bank into a local bank called Permata, and that bank was, it was an amalgamation of 5 other banks, literally, and it had come together as 5 banks coming together through the South Asian crisis, etc. They had come together and become a bank called Permata, which had Standard Chartered holding shares and another local Indonesian conglomerate holding shares. So that was how that bank had come together. In that, we had to do a lot of work around restructuring the organization, and they're not very easy. We had to let go of people, we had to close branches, we had to do a lot of kind of tough decisions that had to be made. And here I was like an imported from Standard Chartered with no knowledge of the local language, with no thing. So those were really very, very tough times that we went through. But how did and there were days when it used to be quite difficult dealing with the union, dealing with the people, etc. But I think the learning I took from there was empathy makes a big, big difference in situations of that nature. So I kind of invested time and energy in actually learning the local language by, learning Bahasa Indonesia, by spending time on it, one whole week of an immersion program in Bahasa Indonesia, followed by Saturday lessons when, I sat and spent 2-3 hours on it, practiced it as much as possible, etc. So I think the point that I made on that one is, there were some failures, some successes in that, and some things we did well, some things we didn't do well. But I think the broader point was anything of this nature which involves a recalibration of a business, anything which involves a reset of a business which has a people impact, needs a lot of empathy, needs a lot of, it's not sympathy actually, it's really about empathy. So I think that was one of the learnings I took from that, and those have held me instead quite well through the journey. I hope I've kind of addressed your question, Ankur.
Yeah, no, of course. Along this way, ma'am, when you were going through certain low points, whether it was 2018, I clearly remember that month and that duration because I was in touch with Jitesh and know that he was literally on boats, going from house to house, saving. And a lot of people from Federal Bank were not just working to make sure that the bank was up and running, but also helping the local community because it was a terrible event, right? And as you rightly said, it was a black swan event. During such times, there are a lot of frameworks, decision-making frameworks, or people who help us, right? Historically, what have been like one to three people or books or authors who have had a great influence on your life and helped form your personality, helped form your frameworks and mental models?
I'll talk about people first, Ankur, and I've had the fortune over the last so many years of my work exad prior to that of being, kind of exposed to very, very many people. Obviously, in the formative years, as is typical for most people, it would be parents, and I think I attribute a lot of that to my parents and my sister, etc., who've kind of embedded in me a lot of the principles by which I live my life. But I think on a more professional front, again, I was fortunate enough to have some formal mentors when I was in Standard Chartered who have really been very useful. But I think one person will stand out in my view, who was my boss for a very long time and is a close friend also. And I think it's more the attributes of what that person, brought to the table. A very, very high level of discipline, and that's something I have always embedded in my life. And tend to try and make sure I'm very, very so very, very high level of discipline. Some of the tenets he taught me, for example, was he used to keep telling me, schedule your priorities, don't prioritize your schedule, which means be very, very clear what you want to do and make sure that is in your schedule. The rest of the time you can then work on what other people want you to do, but otherwise you will get overcome by what other people want to do. So schedule your priorities and make sure they're there, which is something I practice even now. Ankur, you may be familiar with the fact that, the discipline of the steering committees, the discipline of my partner meetings, etc., is coming out of that. So that was one, the discipline. The other was the fact that very, very strong people management skills. And I don't mean people management skills only in the rah-rah kind of form, which is also useful and required, but more at a deeper level, understanding what the team is, what the composition of the team is, what do they bring to the table, which areas do they need more empowerment in and they can be left to do things on their own, which areas do they need help on and support on. how do we make sure that anything good is really the team's success, but if anything goes wrong, it's really your own responsibility, meaning the leader's responsibility. So some of these tenets that he's kind of embedded in me over the formative years of my professional career have stood me in good stead. So he's the kind of go-to person. I call the 3 a.m. friend, right? Somebody you can go to even at 3 in the morning if something were to go wrong, God forbid. So I think that really has influenced a lot of what I do in my professional career, and there have been many, many more people. My current boss, who you've had the fortune of meeting, Shyam, is clearly a hugely people-centric business that he has built, and the innovation he's brought in have been again tenets. But I think, yeah, so at various points in time, various people have influenced me, and I think I take some learning from a lot of them, right? You can never be a copy of anybody else, Ankur. So, I can never be, X or Y or Z. I am me, but I have attributes of A, attributes of B that I try to bring together. And there are areas where I probably need to do more on. But I think that's really what's influenced me. And what I tell my team when I talk to them is, this is not about aping somebody. This is not about copying somebody. That's not really what is required. But listen to people, learn from them, pick up 1 or 2 attributes from each of them that you think is, something that you can embed in, and that's how it is. Insofar as books and authors are concerned, I read an eclectic mix, Ankur. From the sublime to the ridiculous, I read everything that comes my way. The best way to relax at the end of a long working day, read fiction. That's been, from the John Grishams to the Jeffrey Archers to the David Baldaccis. I do all of that stuff because they let me kind of get away from, the stuff that happens in the office. But I think more, I obviously switch between them and some of the other stuff that we read. But I think there are the classics, Good to Great from Jim Collins and all of that. But there's no substitute to learning from observing people, interacting with people. I believe there's huge value in that. Books, etc., can help, but nothing can substitute the physical interactions that one has with people.
Awesome. That's a great answer. When you spoke about empathy, and I've known you for many years now, and I know you are an extremely humble person, right? Adding to those 2 qualities, right? What do you think makes a good leader? Empathy is important, humbleness is important, people management skills is important, and that's exactly what we spoke about, empathizing with the people who work with you, right? What other skills you think are necessary to become a good leader?
I think increasingly one skill that is really becoming important for a leader is what I call unlearn, relearn, and learn, unlearn, relearn in whichever order and priority that is there. The world is changing so much, Ankur, right now that as a leader, it's impossible for us to, be at the top of everything unless one is continuously learning. And there is an angle of the humility aspect on it, which is what I at least practice, which is reverse mentoring, if I can use a term of that nature. I'm absolutely no ego about asking the youngest guy in my digital center of excellence team to come and sit here with me and explain what Chat GPT is about or what metaverse is about. I mean, one of the boys in the team, probably less than half my age, is constantly being told, okay, you need to take a lesson for us on metaverse and tell us what we can do with metaverse. So I think that whole learning, relearning, unlearning is extremely important, not just for a leader, for anybody, but particularly for a leader, because you've got to be a role model for people. You can't be out of sync with people when somebody's talking about a Chat GPT or a metaverse, or somebody's even talking about football for that matter, which I don't follow much of, I must admit. But thing. So I think that whole aspect is there. In addition to all that you said, which we've discussed, like empathy, prioritization, discipline, focus. The other is, how do you take more responsibility for the actions of the team? Empower, yes, we should. But at the end of the day, realize the fact that, the buck has to stop with you. And that's a hugely beneficial attribute in my view for leaders, to be absolutely open about the fact that, yes, I'm empowering the team, but the accountability rests with me. Ultimately, God forbid something goes wrong, I'm accountable for it. I think that high level of accountability for actions is another attribute that I respect in leaders, and I think might, I would expect my team to expect that from me.
Awesome. That's an amazing answer, ma'am. I'm really glad to have had this conversation with you. Thank you so much for coming onto the podcast. One last question for you.
Sure.
What is the kindest thing that anyone has ever done for you?
Oh God, that takes a little bit of thinking, because I think life consists of a lot of them, I would think. But some things that stand out, I must admit, is again, a couple of instances. I think if I go back in time to actually 2004, I lost my father after a very brief illness. It wasn't a very long time. But I think what stood out for me was a couple of my friends and my boss actually flew down all the way from Mumbai into Kerala. It was in a remote place in Kerala that this had happened, and spent an entire day just with me. In the midst of all their busy schedules, etc., the three of them actually took a flight. They had no clue how to get to the place because it is a remote place, but they did all the necessary homework. And this is in a day and age when Google Maps, etc., were not so prevalent and WhatsApp was not so thing. But I think that stood with me. The fact that I've kind of embedded that to say that I may not be able to attend a wedding, but God forbid, if there is a bereavement, that's the time when people actually need you. And I think that kindness plays a lot. The other was really, again, coming back to the floods, Ankur. The day the floods happened and we had to be rescued from home, it was myself, my 80-year-old mother, my sister, and my lady at home. Give me a minute, please. So we were rescued from home, and we were actually taken to a convent. And that the sisters in the convent were extremely kind. They made sure we had hot water, food, a bed to stay in. They had no idea who we were. Sorry. And that was, I think, a hugely kind gesture from them. So I think there are many such examples, but these two stood out for me.
These two are amazing examples. Thank you so much for having.
I'm sorry about that.
No. Thank you so much, ma'am, for having this conversation. Really appreciate the time you gave us. It was a wonderful and enlightening conversation. And once again, thanks for coming onto the podcast.
Thank you very much, Ankur. I love the format of the podcast, and I love what you're doing with embedding this amongst the people. So thank you very much for the opportunity, and we'll be in touch. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, ma'am.